I cannot give all of my time to a fight that is probably going to be here when I'm asleep in the ground. So I'm trying to figure out what's the priority regarding my identity. Sometimes I'm gonna fight that, but I've also got to make sure that with my other hand, I'm building legacy.
Ooh, she's got some wisdom. Shirleena Celestine is a global lead for a large tech firm and a current academic PhD in equality, diversity, and inclusion. With my co-host Grace, let's hop into this conversation.
When I was dating my husband and when I married my husband, it was really interesting because we both had two different experiences of identity. And I said, you know, I was born in the UK and raised in a very traditional home, and he was born in Nigeria, raised in a very traditional home. And people look at us and think, oh, two Black people, but our lived experiences are actually very different. Mm-hmm. And I grew up in a culture where, yes, I experienced racism, probably not as heavy as America or as extroverted as America, but racism nevertheless. Whereas my husband, because he was born in Nigeria, he didn't have that same racist experience at all. And so our perspective on racism has been very, very different. And he taught me quite a lot in as much as he doesn't have an over strong reaction at all to racism. I'm ready to put up the dukes like, who we fighting? Whereas he doesn't. And we had this whole conversation. And the point being how it centers back to identity is because he was raised in an environment where identity is strongly taught, that their identity is almost raised in the principle of I am a king, I am a queen, I know who I am. Their identity is so high to say, you call me the N-word? Number one, how are you even in the same space as me? Because do you know who I am? I was just like,
I love it.
Okay.
That is
okay. Yeah. So he gave me a perspective of that N-word and those racist words, it doesn't offend me because I know who I am. And I'm at such a level that is way above. And again, but it was sitting in, I know who I am. It's impossible for anybody else to tell me that I'm anything different. I was like, oh.
That is awesome.
Oh,
you know,
that is.
I attended an awesome, it was the only Black Catholic high school in the US when I was going there, Cardinal Ritter College Prep in St. Louis. And I remember they went to great lengths to teach us as people who are growing up about the 7 African principles, Kucha Chakalia, Umoji, all kinds of stuff, and just had us thinking about who we were.
Right.
It was really interesting, even learning about melanin there versus going off to college. And one was talking about how it was beneficial to us, you know, protecting us from cancer. And then I was in another environment talking about how it wasn't so beneficial. But it paid to get a grounding in finding out who I was as a Black man in America.
Oh, 100, because, you know, I've preached in a few places. And one of my favorite messages that I preached on is Lion King. And people often say, oh, is she okay today? And I say, no, Lion King is a message, I believe, from God. Because I said, look at Simba. Simba was the image of his father, but when his father left, Simba ended up with Timon and Pumbaa. And we always like taught our kids and everybody's singing Hakuna Matata. But I said, no, we ought not to be singing Hakuna Matata. Because Simba ended up with 2 beasts that he had no business being with. He's a lion. You're a cat and a pig. And so he ended up in an environment eating worms and snails and all kinds of weird stuff because he lost his sense of identity. And it was Rafiki who had to come and find him and remind him and say, you don't know who you really are, and took him to the river, which is the Spirit of God. And when he looked in the river at as small Simba, whose reflection did he see? He saw his father.
Ooh, I'm gonna throw a handkerchief at Lion King
yes,
to preach.
I was like,
that's some good stuff.
There you go. What's the Lion King to say? And I was like, oh, God is speaking through Lion King. Yes, Simba didn't see his own reflection. He saw the image of his father, but it took Rafiki, the intercessor, to say, what are you doing out here in these streets with a pig and a cat? This is not who you are. This is not your identity. Simba, because he was going through imposter syndrome because of that wicked devil scar. He was going through imposter syndrome, feeling like, I don't know who I am. I don't feel like I'm good enough, etc., etc. That's really the story of Moses, but that's for a whole nother show. But the point being is that he lost his sense of identity and got hooked up with a cat and a pig who were trying to tell him, you're just like us. Absolutely not. I'm not like you. And so it took Rafiki sensitive in the spirit and say, we need to go and get our son.
So Rafiki had to go seeking to save that which was lost.
He had to intercede in the spirit and found him and took him to the water, took him to the spirit and said, take a look at who you are. And he saw his father looking back at him, Genesis 1, made after my image. And so ultimately then, thankfully, Simba went back to the kingdom and took up his rightful identity. And when you know your identity, guess what? You have the kingdom. But he couldn't have the kingdom because he didn't know who he was. Go watch Lion King.
That's good.
It kind of sounds like the whole purpose of oppression was to take away who we are, identity. Or to take take away identity. Absolutely. And it kind of trickled down from generation to generation. I may not have been through slavery, but
but
the generation before me knew exactly how to oppress me, even in my own fact. Wow, that is
it's all to do with our identity. Hence, if you look at it now in today's culture, in today's society, that's why, especially in the West, especially in the UK, especially in America, there's a scramble for identity. We want everything African print, African this, African name, everything. You want to know why? Because we don't know who we really are. It's literally an identity crisis that's been had. If we hadn't necessarily experienced slavery, every bit likely that we all would have been born in Africa. And that's a whole different experience. Now, they still have, biases and discriminations, but it's not embedded and steeped in many parts of Africa. There is colorism and things like that, but in a good amount of places, the experience of racism, it just doesn't exist because they were raised completely different. Like I said, in my own marriage relationship, I've learned so much about identity. The reason why if a white person uses the N-word, to a Black person is because it's an attack on our identity. That's the bottom line. If you want to strip it all the way down, it's an attack on our identity to almost infer that we are the lowest of the low and that we are a particular kind of people who are deserving to be treated in a particular kind of way. It's all to do with identity. Because you identify as a Black person, I will call you this word that then lets you know that this is your value, and this is all tied to identity. So if we know who we are, it's almost impossible for racism to an extent. It may exist, but it certainly won't affect me. No, because you can't tell me who I am. And then as believers, that's why it's important that we find our identity in God. Because even before man categorized us based on race, God said in Jeremiah, I knew you before.
That's really good. You know, my book, Innocent Guilt, deals with identity. That's on Amazon and Barnes and Noble. When you were talking about how we have to come to a place of seeing individuals as humans, starting there, I actually was sitting here and I was thinking about things like slavery. I was thinking about Jim Crow laws when, you know, people were convinced that Black people were less than human.
Yes.
My question to you is, I'm very curious about, you know, because I know how things are taught and whitewashed, so to speak, in history books here in America. Growing up in the UK, what did you learn, if anything, about slavery and Jim Crow laws and what was going on with the Black experience here in America?
So we had even less, you know, the Black history, you know, we were given a level of history that was steeped really around the slave trade. It didn't go as deep, you know, as Jim Crow, and it didn't go as far as any of the advocates like Martin Luther King or Malcolm X or anything like that. It was very basic because the UK was focused on its own history and had a very wonderful way of skipping certain things because everybody wants to be a hero. Right. You know, so so it was very, very limited. And so as a Black person in the UK, of course, it didn't mean that we were not experiencing racism because we were still called, you know, racist names. You know, we've still experienced, you know, being kept out of rooms or roles and so forth, you know, and you know that the reason being is because it is steeped in potentially the color of your skin. Now, we didn't necessarily have as many over and extrovert experiences. There's definitely been famous race riots, especially in London, that has happened, but we haven't had as long of a history, I probably dare to say, as what has been here in the Americas. But with all that being said, there is still a line, believe it or not, of, I was saying this to someone the other day because they were like, well, why would you come from the UK to the USA knowing how bad it is? I said, believe it or not, there is a line of, I'm still better off here than the UK as a Black person, as tough as that is, because I was saying to them that you have to understand that the UK as a territory is the UK is so tiny. And I said, please look it up on a map. The UK is a very small place. So because it's so small, you can imagine that the opportunities to advance and develop are very limited already. Like we don't have as much, or like, for example, if let's say you go to, I don't know, Ralph's and you buy a shampoo bottle in the UK, that same shampoo bottle you buy in America is the shampoo. You got all these other options that go with this one shampoo, whereas in the UK, it's just one. So when you come to America, the land and the opportunity for me to advance, for me to develop, simply because there's just a bigger audience here. So my opportunities for advancement are actually greater here, even though the racism is often more extroverted than what it would ever be in the UK because it's such a small island and it's such a small place. And the lived experience that I'm having here as a Black person in the US, I already know it's not the same as a African American. Because I've already noticed that Black Americans are treated differently to Black British people. Before I speak, I often get the experience of how African Americans are treated. As soon as I open my mouth and they say, oh my God, you're from London? And I'll be like, well, I'm not from London because there are more places outside of London. But yeah, I'm from
Grace, it sounds like we need to learn some accents.
Oh, you'll be surprised at what doors, honestly, you'll be shocked. We get treated like we're white British people. As soon as, before I open my mouth, I've been to places where literally they've told me, oh, sorry, we're full, as soon as we're coming through that door. But then as soon as I say, oh, really, what time will the next, they're like, oh my God, are you from London? And I'm like, well, I'm from the UK. Oh my God, just give us a minute. You know what? We've got some space.
Wow.
It's like, hold on a minute. Yeah, we're going through a whole different experience to a Black American. And so again, it's another reason why I said to my friends, I'm better off here. I've had people give me offers and want to do different things just because I am Black and British. The level of curiosity, because often people are like, gosh, there's Black people they just can't comprehend that there's Black people in the UK.
So you have colorism and now locationism?
Yeah, for real. Yeah, like as a Black British person, I get treated far better here than what I would in the UK.
So
because people are just curious.
So it's awesome that that's benefiting you. But how can we change those things in society? Somebody's going to you told that there's not enough point. How can we, what's the answer to change some of these things? You know,
I think it goes back to what we talked about earlier, is our ability to be able to treat people as human beings before anything else. What brings us together in our commonality is we can say, you're a human and I'm a human. And I think if we can help to spread that and teach that, to say, treat people based on their humanity before their identity. It doesn't mean that their identity doesn't matter. Of course it does. But when you have that as a baseline, by the time you get to my identity, we're already good, because you've got as a baseline, oh, if you're anything, you're a human, and I've got to treat you well and be kind and be thoughtful. I may not agree, but our equality should start and our equity should start at the baseline. And that's really what I think we have to teach. Because, you know, it's like when people say, oh, I don't see color. I actually want you to see it, because, you know, there's some great culture that goes with that. But what they're really meaning to say is, it's not so much I don't see color. What you're trying to say is, I see you as a fellow human being. I think that's a better statement than you saying, oh, I don't see color. And I'm like, no, I see it, because there's all the richness of the culture and my heritage and everything else that goes with it. So I think that if we can teach that first, then it opens up the door for us to then be able to teach about identity. And what goes with identity is we can focus on the positive, as what I've mentioned, which is culture. And different cultures.
But it sounds like we need to start with us first. It sounds like if there was a way for, because I know in the Black community there is a war against racism and a war against discrimination. But if we could teach us how to value ourselves,
back to validation,
or not even go away, but it wouldn't affect us. It couldn't. That's pretty amazing. And it's so interesting how the focus has been elsewhere. Like I said, I've never even thought about the value. I've never even thought about the me within. You know what I mean? Like I've always thought about the external part of it. But man, we need to start with us first, because
there you go.
If I can get to a point where I value myself, someone else trying to
you can't do that to me.
Yeah, wow.
You can't. And that's why for me, I'm kind of like that. It's why it centers around this validation, knowing your own identity, then, you know, from an external, dealing with everyone as a human being, and so forth and so forth. Because you see this, you know, I'm a global leader for I&D. But as I say to people, racism is going nowhere. It's not going to go anywhere, unfortunately, because as a human race, we're just flawed that way. But what we can do is at least make a dent on it and an impact on it. And as you rightly said, which is where we kind of got to with this conversation, what's the opinion that you actually have of yourself before someone else comes and tells you, oh, you so-and-so? That's only true if you allow it to be true. But if what you're saying to me carries absolute no value, then what you said, as I said earlier, is just a statement. And as a human being, you are most welcome to say any statement you want. But what you don't have a right that you can confirm it's going to affect me. Only I'm doing that to myself.
Right.
Only I'm doing that. So again, even when you type back to that microaggression, if I want to ask you, what do you mean by that? That's just because I'm nosy, not because it's affecting me. I'm just curious. Because I'm trying to understand, I'm trying to help you a little, because I'm trying to understand, what are you thinking?
Right.
Like, what is on your mind? When you like, and and so forth and so forth. But I can confidently ask you that question because I am so confident and I so love myself.
Good.
I'm so in love with myself. And then that goes back to validation and you knowing who you are. And all of that goes back to also, and I don't have to have everything.
That's good.
I don't have to have the big house and the big car, all these things that we have in LA. I don't need any of that. I just love me because I'm great. And here we go. I'm 1 in a million, 1 in a trillion.
Yeah.
He said, no, you're not. Look at my fingerprints.
Yeah.
Who else got these? Tell me, give me one name and I'm good. So do you know what I mean? It all kind of like goes back and intersects back to identity and knowing who you are. And so that was why when, I was having these conversations with my husband and he was just like, I don't understand all this racism, how it affects. Do you not know who you are? And from him, breaking it down and be like, I know who I am. I'm great and I'm amazing. It then took us on another journey because we're not focused on all of that. We then start to focus on other things, identity, the identity as a father, identity as a husband, and then it was going into other places, which was legacy. I said, oh, I'm done. Like,
this gives me a new appreciation for folks who knew their identity in the midst of adversity. I'm thinking about Rosa Parks, who said, no, not today.
There you go. Yeah.
Staying at the front of this bus today.
Luther.
I'm thinking about Dr. King, who said, I imagine and I dream of a day where people are not judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. It's one thing to know who you are and have identity when everything is a bunch of roses and smells good and it's fine. But what about when you're standing in the face of adversity?
And that's why, remember I was saying about you got to do the work before the situation, and doing that work before, it's constant and it's every day. You got to make a commitment to yourself to do some kind of work today, whether it's I'm doing all right today, or whether I'm a good person, or yes, I can. You got to do something towards the work every single day, because that question, like you rightly asked, which is, but what if I'm not there? Okay, what do we need to do to get you there? Because that also, and I'm not saying it of what you're saying toward me, was my excuse. Yeah, but I'm just not there. And okay, I appreciate circumstances, Shirleena, that you're not there, but what can we do to get you there? Because you have two choices. And you can stay here and not be there, or we can do the work.
Yeah, and getting there is so much more important than anything else. It's more important than the questions. It's more important than what the other person thinks or teaching them. Getting there has become my number one priority just through this show.
Absolutely. To just give it to, because sometimes, literally, Terrence, it's a case of once you've had that conversation to say, do you want to do the work? And so I say, I don't want to do the work. Then okay. Because sometimes, unfortunately, and it is life, until something so dramatic happens for that person where they're like, you know what, I'm tired of this. Mm-hmm. Are you tired enough to now start to do the work? Mm-hmm. And everybody's at a different place. But when you start to do that work and you can really start to look at your identity and what are you using to validate you, like I said, eventually it then takes you on into a new arena, which is legacy. Good. And that legacy is then about, I'm so there. I promise you, anything you say to me, it just doesn't have the power to shift me. Okay? Good. Because I'm now focused on continuously building my identity so that I can leave legacy. If I was to then say to you, think of yourself at 100 years old. Who are you? And what are people saying about you? You could imagine who you want to be at 100 years old. Who are you? What are people saying about you? What are you famous for? And I remember this is part of me doing the work. And I was saying, well, I want to be kind. I want to be thoughtful. I want people to think I'm wise. I want people to think that she did incredible, impactful work in the space of people. I was making a list of all these things at 100 in my rocking chair. You know, this is who I am. And when you finish thinking about who you are at 100, now come back to who you are now. That's the work. That's the work. That's the focus. So that you are now focused on building that person from now till you get to 100. Because now you're focused on building legacy. Listen, this racism war is always going to be there. And God bless you, but I cannot give all of my time to a fight that is probably going to be here when I'm asleep in the ground. So I'm trying to figure out what's the priority regarding my identity. Sometimes I'm going to fight that, but I've also got to make sure that with my other hand, I'm building legacy. And legacy is also then steeped in your purpose. And your purpose is steeped in God. So all these different things that interconnect, and just finally, you know, to land, when I really started to look at legacy and was looking at it with my husband, one of the first questions two questions he asked me, he said, one, what does your name mean? I was like, I don't know what my name is. You know, Africans always have a name that has God is great and God is this, that, and the other. And I was just like, I don't know. He said, your name doesn't have meaning. You don't know who you are. So that was one. Then two, he said to me, how much land do you own? I said, what are you talking about? He said, where's your land? I said, I don't own any land. Nah. We're going to change that. It was all tied to legacy. And he said, you have to own land because this is what we are leaving as a legacy. We have to own literally a piece of the earth to say that we were here to build, to establish, so that we can leave our identity and leave it for our children. I said, I've never even comprehended the idea of owning land. He said, it's your identity that you're going to leave in the earth. That's your legacy. Thanks be to God, we own some land back home in Africa. But ma'am, when I say to you that this man came and changed my whole perspective on my identity, and it impacted my work, that of course we need to, you know, advocate and push for change, but that can't be the only thing that you're doing.
It can't even be the first.
All righty, it's great and it's been wonderful.
Awesome. Have a wonderful day. Thank you.
I will. Take care. Bye-bye.